Welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining this month's The Lonely CEO series in partnership with Indeed and Luminary on how leaders are tackling the issues of diversity, inclusion and equality. Firstly, I hope you and your loved ones are all keeping well during what continues to be a challenging time for so many people. I'm Juliet Scott-Croxford, CEO at Worth Media, and we're thrilled to have such a great lineup of speakers today. We're joined by special guests Beth Ann Kaminkow, Global CEO of Geometry, Stephanie Hull, CEO of Girls Inc., and Cate, Klumper, CEO of Black Glass, and moderated by the wonderful Worth contributor, founder, and CEO of Luminary, Cate Luzio. Hi, everyone.
Hello. Hello.
Hi. I also wanted to give a big shout out and special thanks and appreciation to our partner for this series, Indeed, the #1 job site in the world and a very fitting partner for this content series and the topics that we're covering. Indeed have a great content and resource platform called Indeed, Lead with Indeed, which we'll share a link to at the end of this session. Be sure to check it out, as it has some great resources for leaders focusing on leadership, HR, talent, diversity, equality, and inclusion. Leadership was lonely pre-pandemic, but the changes, challenges, and opportunities of leaders and CEOs, and particularly female and minority leaders, have been heightened significantly over the past 8 months. The essence of this series is really to open up discussions about how top leaders are navigating the recent crisis, from managing the stress of leading teams through uncertain times, to tackling the challenges of launching new products amidst a pandemic, to developing a more diverse and inclusive workplace and workforce. Amidst social unrest and the inequities brought to light through the COVID-19 pandemic and also the racial justice movement, leaders of both small and large companies are having to look at diversity and inclusion and equality in new and different ways. From the boardroom to entry-level hires, having a diverse workforce has never been so important. So we're thrilled to be joined by Cate and special guests Beth Ann Kaminkow, Stephanie Hull and Cate Klumper to share their perspectives on how top leaders are tackling these issues and why diversity, inclusion and equality have become critical to thriving as a business. So without further ado, Cate, I'll hand over to you so you can do housekeeping and take it over as moderator. A big welcome and really excited for this session. Thank you.
Great, thanks Juliet, and thank you everyone for watching, listening in, and participating in what is an important discussion, especially as we have seen, especially on the gender side, more than 865,000 women drop out of the workforce in September. More than 25% of small women-owned businesses have closed during the pandemic permanently. And when you add in people of color and those statistics, they are much, much worse. So not to be a damper, but we're dealing with the reality of why diversity, equality and equity, as well as inclusion, is so important in the workplace, whether you're working or leading a small, a medium, a large company, a public company, a private company, or a nonprofit. And these 3 women I happen to know personally, and I'm really excited to talk to them about what they're doing within their organizations, but also as leaders, how they're handling all of the complexities of what's happening in this world. Juliet ran through everything that we're all dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Add to that working from home. I'm actually working from Luminary, but being so confined and isolated has really exacerbated the challenge, but I think also brings about the opportunity. First, I would just like to say, I know we just chatted, but I know that you are all doing well, but so that we can get a little bit more background. And for those of you that have been or heard me before, especially with the partnership with Worth or Luminary, I don't read bios. I think it's really important for women to tell their stories and amplify their own voices. So if each of you could just give a minute on who you are, and then we'll get right into the topic around how you're tackling within your own organizations diversity, equality, and inclusion. So Beth Ann, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm a brand builder, a marketer, and a developer of talent. I can't come out of largely the agency world and environment. Early on in my career, founded an agency that was purchased by Omnicom, so spent a long time there. I went on to be a global CMO, and now I have the good fortune of being at WPP. I was there first in the capacity of creating the consulting division of Kantar, and now leading Geometry, a global company that's focused on creative commerce.
Amazing. And you are right now quarantining outside of the New York area, or quarantine. Are we still saying quarantining? I don't know, but sheltering in place, any of the terminology.
Remote working, maybe remote working.
Remote working. Yes, I should be saying that. Remote working.
Yeah, I'm
normally based in New York.
More based in New York, although a global positions are really based on planes, which who knows what that will ever be the case again. Yeah, I was out on the West Coast when I was the global CMO of Westfield, and now this is where I was able to be during this time period. So it's not always easy when you're on a global call at 4 o'clock in the morning every day, but you get used to it. And they're the worst places to be.
And Beth Ann, just real quick on, because it's a global business, how many markets are you currently serving today?
Yeah, so we are in 52 countries and 63 markets within those countries. So we have something like Germany and the US, multiple offices in some of those countries. So quite a global footprint. And interesting, because we had a perspective on the global pandemic, probably earlier than many. And I think we were still a little bit in denial, like we were still thinking it was contained to China or to Asia. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we ever really anticipated fully the level that it was going to come to North America, Europe, the UK, and the true global impact it's had.
Great. And I think the other complexity you have is also dealing with all of the cultural nuances in each of those markets. So we'll get into that. Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you, Cate. It's great to be here. So I would say that my origins are in education. I'm an educator from old. I started out as a professor, moved through educational administration, but at the same time, I was always interested on the side in equity work, really working with people from under-resourced communities or underserved populations in various ways. So I made my way through higher education to running an independent school, and went from there to nonprofit, all really focused on preparing the next generation of leaders, preparing people to meet critical challenges in the world. And now I find myself in a really great spot for that. I am the head of Girls Inc., which is a national organization that inspires girls to take the lead. So we are working out of New York City, our office, but we're based in New York City, DC, and Indianapolis. We have 78 affiliates across the United States and Canada. So nothing near Beth Ann's global footprint, but in many cases, when you're traveling, it feels that same way, that we're sort of located somewhere above the North American continent, trying to figure out where everybody is, make sure that girls are safe, that girls are being served well, and increasingly in this environment that they see opportunity and not just limitation, that they're not only dealing with the pandemic and in the ways that it's had us all hunkered down, but that they are still getting the education that they need, seeing the future as a positive thing, and looking forward.
And we'll talk about this, but given the breadth of girls that Girls Inc. serves from K to 12 across the United States and a little bit into Canada, again, the responsibility of the organization to work with these girls and the schools that you support around diversity, equity, inclusion, and making sure that is top of mind for everyone. And I love how you said to not focus on the limitations, but focus on the opportunities. Is first and foremost with the organization of Girls Inc.
Yes, absolutely. That's really, it's very hard increasingly to, because the digital divide has been, the virtual world is not easy when you don't have devices and you don't have connectivity. The pandemic, I think we all know, disproportionately affected these girls. Their families are more likely to be out there in it. So there are all kinds of reasons that we can, get into that it's a challenge. But I think it's always my job also to provide that optimism and that hope. Certainly the resources, but also to model that this is not always, I've been at Girls Inc. for about a year. So a lot of my tenure at Girls Inc. has been this, and I still have to think about where will we be in 5 years. And I hope it's not all in our houses, sort of worried about washing our hands. There's so much more that we need to be doing and thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Stephanie. And last but not least, Miss Cate. Hi.
Hi, ladies. It's so great to be here with all of you. I'm Cate Klumper. I'm a mother, as you saw my son, who has graciously joined us. I'm also CEO and founder of Black Glass, which is a consulting firm that is in partnership with IPG. Prior to that, I was a partner at Deloitte, and I helped run the marketing strategy and creative practice. And 10 days before COVID hit, I decided to take a leap of faith and step away from that role, and actually found a new consulting firm specifically for these types of times, a consulting firm that was agile and modern and infused with data and diverse. And so, COVID has brought to light a lot of interesting aspects of how do you purpose build a company, not only during a pandemic, but in a lot of external factors that are actually facing us on a regular basis. So I'm excited to hear all of your input as well as we navigate this.
Great. And I actually specifically chose the three of you for many reasons, because you're incredible leaders, you're women, but also because you haven't been in your roles in the particular companies that you're leading that long. And the reason I did that is because you're coming in, I think, Beth Ann, you're a little over a year and a half at Geometry, right? Stephanie, you're a little over a year. Cate, obviously, you're now about 7 months, right, into Black Glass, maybe a little bit more. But because you are leading in your roles different organizations from where you came from, and this pandemic happens, then you have the racial injustices, you have companies writing lots of checks, and we love the checks, I always say that, but then where's the accountability? So what has changed for each of you as leaders, taking away just, again, all of the mess, but what has really fundamentally changed, or how are you looking at your role as a leader differently when you combine the pandemic, racial injustices, equality, women leaving the workforce, all of what we're dealing with in 2020? And maybe Stephanie, I see you shaking your head. We'll start with you.
Okay, well, so it's funny because all of these things, it seems like if you just want to pile on, one thing after the other negatively affects Girls Inc. because we're different in that we're a nonprofit. So we exist through charitable contributions of various kinds. The downturn in the economy meant that individuals felt less sure that they could give money away. Foundations were concerned about drawing from their endowments and giving that money away. And then the pandemic kind of came along, and people signaled their commitment to DEI by pivoting constantly. So first the money goes to people who are negatively affected by COVID, and then it goes to people treating nonprofits like businesses and trying to think about how to fund us in a business model. And it was lovely to have that money, as you said, Cate, but it was also not an exact fit. So we had to learn to understand, what does it mean to take a loan, and what, sort of work has to be done. And then I think people started to say, well, we need to be sure we're helping with racial and social justice. So we want to give our money to the bail fund. And it was really kind of hard to just keep on getting in there and say, at the end of the day, Girls Inc. could be all of these things, but we weren't used to sort of scrambling and scrapping for every dollar that way. We weren't used to kind of, maybe it's a thing I should talk to Beth Ann about, but we weren't used to marketing ourselves constantly in keeping with where the money was going. And the thing that, the leadership job changed because I was constantly needing to tell the story. It was more about telling the story than about managing the finances, trying to get people to understand that supporting Girls Inc. is supporting people who are impacted by COVID. It is supporting people who were affected by, the social justice uprising. It is supporting the future and, getting out the vote and the census, all the things people wanted to, to pay for this year. We were all of those things, but we were also led by a Black female executive. And that was another one of the things that came up. And through all that, the great irony is that I still have to struggle on a daily basis to be positioned. It's still true that 70% of the money that goes to a nonprofit goes to one that is led by a white man. So people will, anything that they want to say, it's not what they do. It's still a big discrepancy between the values people want people to think they have and the values that they are, you said, Cate, accountable to. Accountability is not all the way there. There is a lot of social media, but there is less actual accountability.
Agreed.
It's interesting. It seems like there's like a pivot at the beginning, when diversity and inclusion was a topic within companies and even my clients. It was, okay, let's have an employee action group. who's raising their hand, who wants to be a part of it. This is going to be a pillar, and anyone who wants to, do that. Then it matured a little bit where it was like, okay, now we're going to hire a C-suite D&I leader, and they're going to help us drive change from the top. Now I feel like it's actually hit a point of maturity that we will actually drive change because it's a holistic strategy. It's not from the bottom up. It's not one individual at the C-suite. I think it's hit a moment in time that I'm really optimistic that we truly will drive change because it is a pillar within the business plan.
Yeah.
Just to piggyback on that, Katie, what's interesting for us is, we're an organization, this is our mission.
Yeah.
So we live this thing, but it's still hard on the staff because once that gets done and it's holistic, what we're dealing with now is there are a bunch of people who would love to get together and talk and be in a book club and kind of work on this. And there are also a lot of people who are saying, I'm not reading a book about that, and I don't want to talk about it, and I don't want to hear you talk because for so long you've been talking. So I'm trying to kind of juggle between the people who have strong feelings on either side, but who don't mesh well with each other in the sorting out of it all. It's really kind of complicated. And, and should it be somebody in the C-suite? Should it be everybody? Should it be in your goals? Should it be, part of your breakfast? It's really, we're always looking for kind of models and struggling, honestly, a little bit in that space.
Beth Ann?
Yeah, it's interesting, like just to take it back a little bit, again, just in terms of timing of being in this role. When we first came into the business, it was clear that there was a lot of transformation, evolution of the business model and the positioning of the company that needed to be done. So you go to those strategic areas first to try to address them. And then I think as soon as COVID hit, there was a sense of, okay, oh my goodness, like, is this going to throw us off track? Is this going to slow us down? We were building all this momentum. And I think it was my job at that moment to, sort of like get a handle on things for myself first and shore myself up, and then project that positivity and sense of equilibrium in the organization, that this was going to be potentially an accelerator. It's kind of weird to exploit and crisis, but there was a little bit of that. Can we pivot and use this as a catalyzer of our strategy, of our role with clients, and then do it in a more humane way, because we have these, crises or other crises happening simultaneous to it. It's also a moment to really take your own accountability, because when my global CFO and I came into the business together, and she's a rare Black woman global CFO, and the two of us as a pair of leaders for an agency in our industry is rare to have two global females leading the company. Interestingly, in our set of say 5 priorities, ID&E was not one of them. In all honesty, it wasn't that we weren't aware and that we didn't have an agenda around, more diverse recruiting, but we hadn't made it central in the way that we now are taking accountability and responsibility and recognizing it absolutely should be. And we definitely inherited a company that, by nature of the two of us coming in, started to act and look quite different, but we weren't intentionally codifying what that could look like. And so I think in a way, this has held us all accountable. And I think just like we talk about in our personal lives in terms of what the global pandemic has done, it almost shakes you into a different level of reality to reprioritize and start with foundationally, what are the fundamentals that you need to get right in a human oriented way with civility and wisdom that should be the basis of all relationships and contracts and ways that you serve. So I think that was what's happened for us, was just that, real heavy dose of reality and the ability to reprioritize.
But that's pretty unbelievable where, this is, there aren't many companies that have been able to sort of turn the ship around, right? Even if they had it, it was sort of bubbling below, but you are. How are your employees seeing that, right? Because you have employees in so many markets, you have clients around the world. Is that being recognized by the people within the organization?
Well, when you've got an organization that's so large, you've got segments of people like you always would anyway, but certainly heightened during a time like this. I think that one thing we recognized that was working in our favor was everybody, we all, I think as a human nature, want a sense of purpose during a time like this. So you want to feel even more fulfilled based on the actions that you're taking. And it's really helpful in terms of getting out of bed every morning to have like a feeling that you're doing something that is purposeful, that has impact, is going to make a contribution, and is going to be more than just, kind of going through the motions, which you can kind of get through when you're in more of a routine mode.
Yeah.
So I think this gave us that, which was really powerful for people. I think the hard thing was, and it did help that we were all going through this globally, but the hard thing I think for people was, we had a lot of loss. You had people who were sick in our organization. You had people who lost their parents and lost clients, so I think it was like finding the right balance of pushing forward and keeping an agenda that was, business oriented, giving the space for vulnerability and being hugely human and personal, leading that way first, so that people felt the freedom to also show up that way. And then that whole notion of it's okay not to be okay, and finding the space and creating the space for people where that was really okay as well. And we're seeing that now with this next massive wave, where those that were strongest in the beginning have actually gotten exposed and are now sick, or, so it's going to be a cyclical kind of a thing as well.
Yeah.
Katie, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. Like even tactically, when you start to execute some of those like change plans, not even realizing sometimes some of the inequalities that are built into how you're reacting to the pandemic. Like we had a huge debate and discussion about going back to work, and realizing by going back to work, even if it was safe for some individuals, it wasn't safe for others. And what signal does that cause for the individuals who have to stay home to take care of parents or have pre-existing conditions? And are you creating inequalities by trying to make positive decisions? And just that like acute awareness is heightened in a whole different level, in a good way that we're having the conversation, but in a really challenging way where the nuance of some of these decisions are really complex.
So that brings up an interesting point, because as I sort of alluded to in the beginning around obviously underserved communities, people of color that have been disproportionately impacted, women have been extremely disproportionately impacted, and all of these women leaving the workforce. As we head into 2021, you kind of have the perfect storm of everything that's continuing to happen, right? And nothing has gone away. And we have 2 weeks before an election, right? So either way it goes, there's going to be more unrest because somebody's not going to be happy. Mm-hmm. But as we think about women in particular, and that staggering number, that's September, and a lot of that, and Katie, we saw your son come in and peek through the door. I think we've all gotten used to that, and that's great. Because we now know what people have in their lives. You have a lot of women that have to take a step back. Mm-hmm. Women of color, we did a study earlier this year with Bustle, and BIPOC women, we're saying we have to take a bigger step back than white women, right? You might have more single mothers, you might have essential workers frontline. You also have the issue of these women that are taking a step back, how that changes the trajectory of the rest of their career from a pay standpoint, promotions and roles. And I just wanted your individual, this doesn't necessarily reflect on what you're doing within your organization, but what are your thoughts around what we're actually inheriting, if you think about it, as women as we go forward? And I saw all of you sort of shaking your head. Stephanie, maybe you want to jump in?
Or, I'll jump in. This is something we think about a lot. And it actually even goes further down because when kids don't go to school for the length of time that kids haven't gone to school, some kids will catch up and other kids won't. And the kids who are behind when they started are more likely to be the kids of color from the low income communities, and they're never going to catch up. And so, combine that with the fact that your mother isn't going to catch up. And right. And your world is significantly different from the world that you had imagined. And I would then say, with social justice being what it is, there's a lot of talking about how we want people to do better and to have better things, but there's not a lot of deep investment in making that better. So as people feel like, okay, now everybody's behind, it creates that environment where now I think it's less likely people are going to share. I really, my experience of this world is when people have scarce commodities, they compete harder for them, and they are just not as generous with them. And, you know, and 40% of nonprofits are going to fail, everybody says. So even in this nonprofit space where we're the nicest of the people in the business world. But if you think that you either acquire another nonprofit or get acquired by a nonprofit, it changes your mindset. So, you know, I'm dancing around the answer to your specific question, Cate, but I think as women lose their toehold in this, I think women's leadership stereotypically was part of the solution to this problem. It was part of the thinking about coalitions. It was part of the thinking about collaboration and getting away from just strict competition and, you know, creating other ways of doing things, understanding, you know, that there are women CEOs who have little kids who knock or don't knock and come into their rooms and need a minute. You know, we've all figured out we can actually work and multitask and do all the things everybody's always said women can do. And we can hold up our half of this, except if you take us out.
Right.
So you can't be talking on the one hand about how well that's going to go and how we, you know, help the economy and we should be on the corporate boards and, you know, and then on the other hand, we shouldn't actually have jobs and our children should be, you know, disenfranchised and we should, I don't know, deal with that, you know, feel okay about that as the community organizations that would help us fall apart around us. You know, so none of this really makes sense from an economic perspective. And so from a very personal perspective, I hate seeing it because all of our best friends, all of the people who support us are, you know, women in business and foundations, you know, who they care about girls because they were girls a lot of the time. And that's just a fact of our lives. So to see people falling out of the ability to help girls when girls need help the most and when women need help the most it's hard to keep your head up. It's really kind of hard to say we need to just get through this and we're going to move on because so many of the soldiers are going to have fallen by the time we pick this up again. You know, and who's going to be out there?
That's the chat. I mean, I think I'll add, I mean, you know, we know at Luminary, we're not even 2 years old, right? And we're a small business, we're a self-funded business, but we partner with women's organizations around the country. And 5 of those women's organizations, 5 of those communities that support women-owned businesses, that support women in corporate America in their careers and advancing them, have gone out of business permanently. Right. And so what's that saying to the broader community when you no longer have that support, whether you're a 6th grader to a 35-year-old to a 55-year-old that's trying to return or pivot out of their career? I don't know, Beth Ann or Cate, again, you're all strong women and have opinions on this.
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree with what you're both saying. I think what we're all probably saying. I think that this is sort of in a way tailor-made to exhibit exactly why, when some people say the future is female, why people believe that. I think we're definitely seeing a need and demand for new styles of leadership, and ones that we do feel that, you know, women are probably very well fit for. However, you know, I was recently working with Sheryl Sandberg because we just put out the World Women Hour for World Women Foundation. If you haven't seen it, everyone who's watching should take a look at it too. Incredible stories of 60 women that were told through 60-second narratives.
It's amazing.
And the research that they've just recently done, again, has also just emphasized this fact that even if you look at a woman's day, the hour spent on work in all aspects of work, our work at home, our work with our children, our work keeping up the house, getting the food on the table. Obviously that just really differ for more underserved communities as well, that have even more burdens placed on them in those environments. And it's very disheartening to think right now what's happening now across the board for all women is, I think everyone is experiencing a disproportionate level of burden and exhaustion, quite honestly, placed on them, that we need to figure out ways, you know, as of networks, as communities, to just be super attuned to and ahead, trying to proactively engage in the conversations that will surface the need that people are sometimes afraid to ask for. But I do think, this focus on diversity also made us realize that we had not moved the needle. In many aspects, we were further behind. And then you add the gender to it, and you see now we're gonna be even further behind. So I don't have the answers completely, but I just know that it's going to take all of us to not let up. I think that figuring out a way to sustain the level of transparency and accountability around the focus and prioritization of making sure that we're keeping the diversity and the gender equality in the business, and we're doing things to address the issues that still have not been dealt with.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. There's going to be a whole long tail effect. We're not even seeing the complete impact right now, not only on us, but the generations that are following. And the stats are sad. They really are. And it's still early days. I think the thing that gives me hope is that where government's not able to support and step in, companies are leaning in heavily. For a very first time that I've seen in my career, companies are taking a stance on issues and challenges and inequalities that they were too scared to take a stance in before, which is a huge step forward. In addition to that, I see a lot of my clients, they're saying, how do we use this moment to reframe what talent looks like in our organization? How do we restructure it? It's not, yes, we have to do furloughs and these horrible things that are going to impact families, but they're looking at it in addition to that of how do we move the needle forward on all the other agendas at the same time. And there's some incredible companies like Second Shift and We Are Rosie that are innovative ways for companies to tap into a different type of talent. And my hope is that the more that we can bring those innovations to the forefront and companies are able to leverage those new ways of working, it makes it turnkey on both sides of the table that hopefully starts to solve some of the challenges at a baby level.
I love that you brought that up. I think there's, and we work with, we're a great partner. We love the Second Shifts and their mission. And I think they were way ahead of their time. And we're talking to companies before companies could even embrace flexible work and flexibility and women working from home. Because there's this myth that when you're at home, no one's productive, right? You're all sitting on the beach. Well, that's not the reality, right? We've seen how many Zooms where you're multitasking here because that's your life. But there's an opportunity for companies to really embrace this idea of, and I had a conversation yesterday with Bloomberg about this around training managers, right? Training managers to understand how to work with their people, right? Because you can't expect managers to just know, to say, oh, we embrace diversity, we embrace equality. Managers need to be trained, right? There's also this, everyone doesn't have to be full-time anymore, right? There are options, there are opportunities where women and men, this is just women, can take these, work with companies, and maybe they're not always looking for full-time. There's contractor roles. There's just a lot out there that I think if we educate companies, and I think companies are trying to do that, and look at across their populations, how do we support? And I think that is what Girls Inc. does for all of our girls. And I say our because, again, full disclosure, I'm on the board of Girls Inc. nationally, around how do we support these girls as they're moving up before they even get to college and into their careers.
Mm-hmm. And I think, I'm hoping that there can be eventually, we're all kind of trying to dig ourselves out individually, but it's heartening to me to be part of conversations, because the reason that this is happening is that a bunch of factors came together and took the bottom out of it. There may be a possible solution where if business really were committed to this, maybe there are a number of factors that business and government could put together to undo significant parts of it. It doesn't necessarily, as Cate said, there's this long tail, but there are economists and political economists who could figure out how to counteract that. It doesn't have to play out the way it is playing out. You could create an antidote through some coalition of factors that people might agree is the right thing, and then we could take that on, and we could at least truncate the tail. Do something besides sit and wring our hands and say, wow, we had such a great start and I guess we lost. I think this is part of what we tell our girls, that you might look at a situation and feel a little bit of dismay, but your next step isn't to turn around and go home. You face it, you think about it, you talk to other people about it, and you at least try something, throw something at it. Don't just walk away and say, well, it was nice when we had equity in careers. None of us really want to give up.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing too is we're not just at an inflection point, we're at a true turning point. And that's where I also get positive. To Cate's point, going back to the corporations, it opens up a new role for corporations to play. And before, areas that you used to say were sort of off limits or boundaries you wouldn't cross are now crossed with more purpose behind them. So like conversations can be raised, accountability can be placed, and the role of an organization really does need to shift and fill a void. I was on a call last week where we were talking about scenario planning for the election outcomes. And one of the interesting points we were discussing is that at some point, depending upon what the outcomes are, we might need to start creating shadow governments. And a lot of that was just simply to say that you can take these areas of the environment or education, and like, a lot of the issues, Stephanie, that you're dealing with, and then say, what are the corporate nonprofit relationships? What are the things that now have to be in place and decisions that have to be made that are not just contingent on waiting for a government involvement in some of these things that they're maybe deprioritizing or thinking aren't real issues? So even the science community, and we've seen that even in terms of the sort of rigor around the vaccine and the corporations that are stepping up there. So I do think that kind of makes all of us probably feel quite more positive about the outlook of what's going to come, and we can all play a part in helping to shape and guide our the corporations into places that could really benefit and do good.
Yeah. And I think, speaking on sort of behalf of our partner in this, indeed, one of the things that we talk with them about is how are they as a company focused on putting people in jobs, right? That is their number one goal, right? To help the job seeker. And I think they're going to have a lot more people, as we've seen throughout the pandemic, and now all of these women that are going to be looking for roles. And there's also going to be a lot of new businesses that are started out of this. We saw this after 2008. They're called necessity entrepreneurs. But I think you're right, Beth Ann. I mean, what we've seen is, kind of biased towards Luminary, is a number of companies that we were already partnered with to support their women, right? To advance their women in their own organizations in helping their communities where they live, work, and serve. And I think there's going to be public, private, and obviously nonprofit, sort of the sectors kind of coming together to do this. But as you lead these organizations, right? So back to sort of your roles as leaders, one of the biggest challenges that people will throw up there, or the circumstances, they don't have a pipeline. And we've heard this recently from a number of very senior people, particularly in the finance world. There are pipelines out there. And so more probably for Beth Ann and Cate in the larger organizations, how do you both within WPP and Geometry, IPG, Black Glass approach the pipeline, or has that changed as you're thinking about promoting people of color and women in the pipeline? And how are you developing that pipeline?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. There is a pipeline. They're out there. They're not hidden. There are people who are looking for jobs who are qualified and should be at the table. I think the challenge being, and I can speak even for myself, when I'm building the company, it's like, who are my people? Who are my go-tos? Who's in my immediate network? But that doesn't look any different than me. Mm-hmm. And it's being really, one, conscious of it and saying, okay, this is a natural reflex we all have, so let's address it. But two, it's building a network completely outside of your own immediate friends, family, coworkers, and making a deliberate effort. And there's a lot of companies popping up like Lunch Club and even Luminary, in terms of other groups that force you to network and expand the base in which you're pulling from. And so that you're able to pull a whole new set of awesome, incredible talent that may not have been in your normal circle, which is hard and it takes time and requires effort and energy, but it definitely pays dividends.
Yeah, I mean, very similarly, I think you're exactly right. Sometimes it's not that we don't know about the talent, it's that they don't know about us. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we've really tried to do is just spread the word, both at the WPP level and a Geometry level, I think much further than we would have before, and really looked at the way we write job descriptions and think about job titles and look at job requirements, and realize that we've been just so rigid. To have anyone check all those boxes really does sometimes perpetuate the issues that we see in the business. And our business would probably benefit greatly if we just expanded brought in more diversity. I mean, literally in every aspect of it, we would see the benefit of that. And we've just sometimes gotten so narrow thinking that capacity and capability and competency, look like this versus what it could look like. The other thing I thought about really early on when we were doing this with LinkedIn, I was thinking, it would be so amazing if LinkedIn could give you an index or score of how diverse your network is. And then hold us all accountable to actually what the reality is of the, 10,000 people or whatever it is that's in our LinkedIn network. And then, of course,
what a great idea.
Yeah, and of course you can't just snap your fingers and act right away. So what I thought about was, well, how do I think about the algorithm and make my LinkedIn profile do that for me? And so that's exactly what I kind of intentionally did, is I started to make sure that I was inviting and linking myself in with people that were a bit more expansive and more diverse than I maybe had before. And then with that, of course, you end up getting, do you know this person or do you know this person? Yeah. It just happens naturally, right? And so in a matter of time, it just brought me into different kinds of invites and different kind of webinars and different conversations. And so I think, we tell that story internally too, so that more people do that in their own, their own networks and their own cascading that down to their own, jobs and communities within our organization. So I think I think the most important thing for us is the dedication to it, and I think for whatever reason, maybe it's a campaign mentality that marketers have, but it's like, everyone's like one and done.
Yeah.
And this is like, we're talking the next decade, day in and day out, we have to be raising this agenda and doing things, behaving differently, taking different action for this to really be about bringing about sustainable change. And I think that's the biggest change management mindset that I'm finding people have to really understand and start to adjust to.
Yeah. I mean, I really echo that, Beth Ann. I think, one of the things that it's interesting to hear you both say that your networks are a little bit homogeneous, because that's absolutely not true about my network. It's very different being a CEO of color. You have very little chance of composing a giant network of CEOs of color, or CEOs who are women of color. So there is a part of the population who already had to do that adjusting and, sort of think about different leadership. And, throughout my career, the mentors I've been able to seek out, it was very rare for me to find a Black woman who did the thing that I wanted to do. So I had white men as mentors. I had white women as mentors. I couldn't make a monolithic network. And I think part of what you also will experience as we try to make this change is, now everybody has to make a change, and now I'm in that boat too, and I'm in the book group reading too. But if you think about people like me, we have been asked to adapt and change and adjust forever. And, and so that's a piece of it too. It's, that everybody has to change and everybody's got to pivot now, but, and we work on this thing all the time. And now we're sort of, okay, now you're equally accountable to work on this thing. We get no credit for the 400 years during which we tried to adapt and tried to understand and tried to make ourselves presentable and tried to make ourselves understandable. And we get the shaft when the bad things start to happen, and we get no further when the good things start to happen. I hope too that we can think about some of the ways to, to reallocate a little bit, because all of a sudden starting out on an equal foot, equity is that thing where it's not, we don't start out on an equal foot when everybody realizes that women should be leaders. We're still behind, and we still, all of the little girls who are growing up now whose mothers can't work anymore don't see women work. And it's true that they don't have any idea what the two of you do. They have no access to that, because when will they ever see a woman do that thing if their own mother doesn't work and their education is not what it should be? So, I hope that we also think about some of those things that are good ways and not just remedial ways of recentering people and kind of bringing them up. But I don't like it always to be the poor, pitiful girl needs your help. I would like there to be, and I don't know what this is either. It's like your sort of algorithm question. I don't know how to solve it, but I'd love to figure out how respectfully we could put girls and women in a better position related to this. And really, maybe some people need, 50 extra points and some people only need 2 extra points, but we've got to figure that out too. And, again, thinking about the scarcity, I just worry that people are going to think, well, it's enough that I even let them talk. It's enough that I let them be at the table, let them scrabble for themselves and figure it out for themselves, when it's not going to get us there. It'll get some women there.
Well, that actually brings up a really interesting point. So and I think you all know that I spent, close to 20 years in finance and corporate investment banking, and never had a female or woman mentor, always men, and they were wonderful and sponsors. But the conversation and the topic around goals and quotas has always been sort of creeping, right? Particularly around boards. And some states and some companies are making that part of. How do all three of you feel about goals and metrics, or even taking it to the extreme of quotas, to make sure companies are fulfilling that diversity slate? Because back to Stephanie, what you just said, Cate and Beth Ann will have a much bigger network, but they have to sort of think about, what does that look like? You've had to since the beginning, because as you said, there aren't many Black female CEOs, or Black male CEOs for that matter. So it's always been part of what you do. But do you think that's part of the answer?
I'll say, this is one of the questions that's hardest. I do think it's part of the answer for some people. It's not always organic, and the people who don't do it organically need that to be the answer. But, I've encountered, for example, in fundraising, we go out with this, this is what girls need and deserve, and it's a very left-leaning platform. I've encountered people who say, look, we are a listed company. We do things in the best interest of our stockholders. If we're, if this doesn't have a benefit for the company, we can't invest in it. But I've been taught to come back with an argument that can appeal to them, because everything has two sides, so maybe quota is one side of this for some people. Mm-hmm. And maybe this organic urge that, Cate and Beth Ann say, like, this is the right thing to do, and of course we're doing it. Maybe it is somebody demonstrating the economic value of this, which is almost like a quota. I think we have to, one of the things I know I have to do is get over the origin of it. At the end of the day, the outcome is really what we need to focus on. If you let children of color have access because you believe that it's the right thing, they get access. If you let them have access because you believe that it's going to cost you money if they go to prison, they still get access. And at the end of the day, if we parse everybody's motives for including women properly in the workforce, that takes away from the energy of just getting it done. Mm-hmm. When they get there, they'll show that they should have been there. And I think that reverses the problem. That's my view. Personally, I hate quotas because it feels like that's at the very other end of where my heart is. I want people to just want me there. I don't want people to say I had to let her be there, but I want to be there at the end of the day. And so, even if that hurts my heart, I will take my seat, and I will see if I can convince you that you really missed out for all the years that you didn't let me be there. But it's hard. It's hard on behalf of the girls. That's a hard thing to come to. I just would have thought by now it would have been organic, and it would have felt completely logical and sensible and natural.
I think that's where I've come full circle, because I felt that way too, but then no real change has been made. And so I just feel like there does need to be accountability, and it can't be numbers, quotas, goals, in the absence of still building a culture and having the conversations that need to happen along the way, because then there's no inclusion, right? You can go for diversity, but there's no culture of inclusion. People don't fit. What we're experiencing right now too is a little bit of like almost backlash and resentment from people who feel like, does this mean, like, I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard white males matter, does this mean that there's less opportunity for us, that we're not going to be a meritocracy, that all of a sudden every hire that we make for the next 6 to 9 months is going to be a diversity hire? Those are the things that you honestly hear. And so I think we need to be equipped with how do we deal with those conversations, and the training helps. And the opening of minds, but I think we need the numbers in the mix, or else we don't really bring about the change. And I think, Stephanie, it's to your earlier point about people want to believe that they're good people, and they want to say the right things. And we know this now, we're going to see the numbers politically in terms of what we hear and what we say and what polls tell us, but then what reality is. And so I think we need things that set reality in motion, and in our view.
Yeah, I agree. I think I hate it as much as everyone else, but I don't know how else to hold people accountable. And at least it demonstrates that, to your point, Stephanie, we get the seat at the table to prove why we're there. And I'll give you a really specific example. And it kind of ties back to your point, Beth Ann, about job description. So I went to a school, got a diploma in Canada. It was an 18-month certificate. there's no way I would have been able to become a partner at Deloitte without having the pedigree that is traditionally required.
Right.
But rightfully so, Deloitte's like, we need to look at the mixture of people we have at the table differently. And what does that start to look like in terms of changing where they come from, what schooling they have, what background? And I'll tell you, I ran circles around him and I was good at my job. But I have no doubt at some point in some conversation through the multitude of interviews that someone said, you know what, this also helps accomplish one of our other objectives.
Sure.
And I was okay with it at that point because I was like, you know what, I'm good at my job. I know I can do this. And if you want to hire me for that reason, fine. But I'm going to prove to you the other reason why you should have hired me. Because I don't know how else I would have been able to get through some of those conversations. So it's a personal way of saying I agree with all of you. You know, I've been on that side of the equation, and my hope is I can help pull everyone else along with it, and same with you ladies as well.
Yeah, it's that once we have that seat, right, we're changing the hearts and minds of those around that table, right? And ultimately, because you're in that position of power and influence and leadership, the people below you start to see that, right? And I do feel like a lot of organizations are figuring that out. But it's also making sure that these women aren't put in these positions to fail, right? We hear about the glass ceiling all the time, but there's also the glass cliff. And I can rattle off dozens of women that have been put in that position. And that's just, oh, well, they inherited that job and they couldn't do it. Well, actually, you put them in that job. You said you wanted a woman. And again, this is nothing against the men. I love men. We work with men all the time at Luminary. We're not exclusive, but we need them to also be on the same page. And it's not just women. It's all of the diversity, right? It's diversity of gender, it's diversity of race, it's diversity of the LGBTQ plus community. I will tell you, last week we did a panel at the end of the close of Hispanic Heritage Month, and we had 3 incredible Latinx women, and some of the stories they told just broke my heart because of what they've encountered, even just around, and Stephanie kind of alluded to it, around their hair. What do you, how you present yourself is so different, even from a white woman to a Black woman to a Latinx woman and so forth. So I sort of, the reason I ask that is because I'm in agreement with all of you around the goals and quotas. And I just think that if we don't do something, we're going to be sitting here in 10 years having the same panel and the same discussion around how to have a chief diversity officer and the BRGs, and there's not going to be enough done.
Yeah, I really agree.
So we have I know we have a couple of minutes left, but as you're thinking about, yourself as leaders, particularly as women leaders, how are you demonstrating your seat at the table? And I don't mean taking, you've all taken your seat at the table, but showing others within your companies, within your communities, within your own families, that you can be, and Stephanie, to quote Girls Inc., a strong, smart, and bold woman and succeed. Because I think those stories and those anecdotes are really important. Stephanie, I'm going to go to you because
I'm first again. So I would say I do that with a fair amount of humility. It's I do feel very fortunate to be the CEO of this particular company, but I also don't apologize for leadership. I think I owe it to the girls to be here because I am the person who should be here and not because they needed a woman or a Black woman or, that kind of thing. I think it's important just to do your best and to be in conversation with it at all times. It's, nothing that we've done in the past 8 months is anything anybody knew how to do. So in a lot of, in a good way, my first year and change of this organizational leadership has been colored by impossible things that we all had to accomplish. And so I feel like we've invented a whole lot of impossible things and we've done an amazing job holding it together. At the same time, I want women and girls to know that it's not miserable. It's a great job. To be in the role that I'm in is a fantastic thing to be. And it feels incredibly lucky to be so well employed during this time. Everybody wants to do something. Somebody on this panel said it earlier, you feel like you need to be doing something. This is the very best thing I can think of to be doing, to think about the future and about young women and girls and helping them solve all the things that we're sitting here trying to solve after our whole work lives and after our parents' working lives and their parents before them. It feels good to be here. And at the same time, it's incredibly hard, and it's really refreshing to talk to other women about what's hard about it, especially the DEI stuff is, it is a puzzle. Social justice is a huge, huge monster that, that we're tasked with solving. We're tasked with keeping the pressure on. We're tasked with everything else we're tasked with. It's, it's just been kind of a wild ride. And, when I thought about coming to this conversation today, I was sort of thinking, I don't really regret it, which I know makes me sound crazy. But I do feel recharged by these moments. And so thank you for letting us be part of it.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Katie, Beth Ann?
Go ahead, Katie.
I think a lot of what I've tried to bring forth as a leader is actually not necessarily going outward to big clients and helping to impact them, but actually at a local level. I think the small businesses have been impacted the most. And so how do I use my resources, my company's resources, my family to go and help the small and local businesses do good, help create more jobs, be able to help them survive, have their seat at the table. And for me, that's where I get a lot of my energy from, because they are the ones that are in so much need of it. And I think there's a lot of things from a leadership style that we always can be doing, but to be able to impact on a one-to-one level on your community and your small businesses and your family, be able to participate in it, it's just a whole new level of impact that I think sometimes people overlook because they're looking for the big things.
Yeah.
They're looking for what's the big solution and what's the number of hires and what's the this? And it's go help the business across the street, go volunteer your time, go take your family and go help the dry cleaners figure out what to pivot their business. That is so incredibly valuable to those individuals. And so I always encourage everyone to that's where you should start. Don't try to start at the big things, because if you can get some energy and momentum on the small things, then you'll be able to tackle a lot of those bigger challenges.
I completely agree with that. We're doing the same thing. And the last thing I would just add, because I know we're up on time, is to pass the mic. That's one thing I think too with my global CFO partner, Stacey Ryan, Cornelius, give other people a voice and a stage. It doesn't always have to be you.
I love that. And as I will say, we have to get her on the next one, Beth Ann. Yeah. So I'm holding you accountable to that. So we'll connect on that. I want to thank Stephanie, Katie, and Beth Ann for being so open, honest, direct, transparent. I think there's a lot of, I wrote a ton of notes. I always take a ton of notes. I'm old school. So thank you. For me, this is also really wonderful to have three women that I admire, that I consider just incredible leaders, speaking to the Worth platform, the Luminary community, and that we're in this together. Juliet? That
was amazing. Thank you. And I loved what you said, Stephanie, about, it is an amazing position to be in, being a leader of a company. It can be really hard, but I think it's an amazingly privileged position to be in, and to be employed at this time. But thank you so much. It was such an open conversation and full of really, really good advice. Also, thanks for shouting out the Second Shift, one of our sister brands. We shared the link to them on the chat group as well. A big thank you to you, Cate, and the team at Luminary for partnering with us on this series, and to the Women in Worth community as well. And a big thank you again to Carmen and the team at Indeed for being our partner for this series. Again, be sure to check out their Lead with Indeed content platform. There's some great resources on there, which I know Molly has just shared on the chat as well. And most importantly, thanks to all of you that tuned in today. Thanks for the great questions. We hope you enjoyed it. Please do share any feedback with us or comments that you would like to, or topics that you'd like to cover in the next Future Lonely CEO series. You can email us at community@worth.com. We'll be back again in November. So look out for that date, and also join us tomorrow, 3 p.m. ET, for the next session of the Next Normal series on how women can boost their financial confidence right now. That will be with Cece Elisa and Kathleen Entwistle, private wealth advisor at Morgan Stanley. You can register for this online at worth.com/events and all of our other events. And we'll look forward to seeing you soon. In the meantime, be kind, stay healthy, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Everybody. Bye-bye.